where do you start with today's guest? I mean, you could talk about theatre, and if she'd only done theatre, the theatre that she's done would be, ooh, you'd go, oh yeah, very good. But now, at this stage of her career, I mean, and I will say this to her face, I am saying it to her face, she sat there, although I'm not looking at her, but I'm not being rude, I'm talking to you. She's suddenly in these zeitgeisty TV shows, and it's glorious talking to somebody who's having another wonderful, did you say purple patch, in their career, Dame Harriet Walter.
Thank you.
Don't forget, you can hear the full-length, longer version wherever you get your podcasts.
Purple patch sounds a bit rude.
I'm sorry, I have a bit of a purple patch. I am the dry cleaner, will sort it out, but it's the colour that worries me more than anything else. But I was so thrilled. We've met a few times, but I was so thrilled that you were doing this, and I'm going to have to try to not just talk about Succession, because I'm a Succession addict.
Yeah.
It's just glorious. And your part, it's a hell of a part. It's a hell of a role. Tell me the first time you read it.
Well, the first time I read that, I was offered, I was sent the pilot, which was already made, which is wonderful because you don't normally get that. You get a script, and I'm very bad at reading scripts.
Yeah.
So to have a pilot to watch with my old friend Brian Cox and my slight friend Matthew McFadden being absolutely brilliant, I thought, well, of course I want to join the party, you know.
Was that what became episode 1?
That was episode 1.
Yeah.
And they hadn't written or done any of the rest of it. And, well, they'd written it. But the way that Jesse Armstrong worked then was, you know, he had a scheme for your character, but he hadn't written it. And he just rang me up and said, look, you're going to come in at the wedding at the end of your daughter, and you're just going to go around asking everyone how long they think it'll last. And that's it. That's all he told me. What I loved about her was she was saying quite nasty things, but she always said them charmingly. Oh, yeah, so there was a wonderful line that Matthew's character has when he goes to his to-be wife and says, I think I've just been insulted. You know, because the way she says things, you're not quite sure.
She seems to me really authentically of her type, of her class. And I've dipped my toes in those waters, and I've had some encounters. Are you familiar with that world? I memean, your background is interesting. I mean, you come from a well-to-do background.
How would you describe it? In sort of downwardly mobile upper class, I suppose.
Downwardly mobile.
Yeah, I mean, my dad came from a big, wealthy family, but he was the second son in the scenario where the first son gets everything. And my grandfather lost a lot of money and, you know, so it all went downhill a bit. But my dad and my mum from a different, you know, my mum came from sort of Italian aristocracy and British army stuff. So they all came from sort of, but they were all by that time not very well off.
Right.
So it was sort of, but what happened was they knew people who had, you know, country piles, and so I always think of it as we lived on the foothills of aristocracy.
Yeah.
We were very low down, but we rubbed shoulders with people. So I was aware of them, but I wasn't of them. But I was very aware of a certain type of behaviour that was all, and sort of rubbed off on my whole family. It was, you know, you didn't ever say anything terribly serious. You know, you didn't get into the nitty-gritty of your inner soul. You didn't talk about yourself. Everything was flippant. Everything was glib. And you said important things. If you did say important things, you said them with a sort of, you know, a quick get-out clause that could make it sort of... Because
they were uncomfortable with feelings?
I think it was, A, uncomfortable with feelings, B, they'd been through the war. That was quite a thing.
Big factor, isn't it?
That was quite a big thing.
Yes.
Because you've probably researched and found out that my uncle was Christopher Lee.
I have researched, and I have found out that your uncle was Christopher Lee.
And he was my mother's brother, and I sort of think, gosh, you know, we're so similar. So many things in our lives and our background forced us into the same job, and we've both got fairly similar sort of abilities and things like that. And I said, but the major difference is that I take my career rather seriously, or used to, And he never took his career very seriously because he'd been to the death camps and liberated them. And he was in before he was 30.
So a career
And
as an
so you
actor
go,
is
I'm
just a
pretending
frippery.
to
Yeah.
bite people in the neck.
Yeah.
What, you know.
Yeah. It's all just gravy. They're paying me loads of money for this.
That's right.
And none now of this generation, thank God, have experienced that.
Exactly, thank God. But it's also what happens is you transfer your sort of intensity to something, maybe more navel gazing, whereas he was like, they didn't discuss things, partly because it was dangerous to discuss what you were doing, and partly because almost you couldn't confront your own feelings if you were about to go and do something scary, So I think there was a lot of that in the atmosphere when I was growing up.
So had you encountered women like Caroline?
Oh, yes.
You play her to perfection.
Thank you. I've got a theory about some of... actually, Tom Hardy was in an interview and said exactly the same thing. I thought, you've stolen my lines. But actually, I've got a theory about when you can do something very exactly as an actor. It's not that you've necessarily got it in you and you're sort of bringing it out. It's that you have closely observed those people for various reasons, either because they really scare you or because you want to be them. Or, there are certain people who, as you grow up, you really watch every single thing they're doing, and it's... And I think that because I've been on the receiving end of rather sort of cold, snooty, witty, put-down people, I've been on the receiving end of that as a young person, and I've so observed it because it's delved into your head because it's so scary or something.
That ability to be so insulting, the way she does it with a smile. I was at a do a few years ago of a lot of well-to-do, rich, some aristocratic people there, and a woman came up to me, and I had been doing some adverts on the television for my sins, and she said, yes, my husband and I, we see you in those adverts. Oh, we do feel so sorry for you. And I didn't know what to say. Because you have to process it, don't you? Because normally it's small talk. Oh, lovely, we do like what you do. Oh, you make us laugh. Yeah. We feel so sorry for you.
Oh, God. What did you say back?
I think
you said, I feel sorry for you.
Well, no, I think I said...
Yeah, that's the trouble. You think of something great afterwards.
I thought of something... later on, I played out in my head all sorts of wonderful things where I cut her down to size. But no, at the time, I think I went...
But would you be the same if somebody not from that class had insulted you? Would you feel more confident to answer back?
I think I would.
That's
Again,
the thing.
To my shame.
Yeah.
I think and isn't that dreadful?
Well, it isn't dreadful. It's built into all sorts of ways we grow up.
I'll give you another one of those. And it brings Prince Harry into the conversation. I was at a thing once. I don't think I've told this publicly. I needed to use the loo. So I'm waiting for the loo. And then he comes and he needs to use the loo. And I offered to stand aside so that he could use the loo. I wouldn't have done that.
No.
I'm in the bloody queue.
I'd have done the same.
Of course, it's my guy. He went, oh, sure. And I said, it's all right. You can go if you want to, Your Royal Highness. Would you like me to help you? I'll get the toilet paper if you like. Any wiping? I didn't say that, but but I came out of there. I said, what the hell did you do that for?
I don't know. There is an argument to say that a few generations have gone past. Now there is such a thing, they even call it showbiz royalty or, comedy royalty, theatre royalty. So occasionally you meet those people and they seem to be as deferential towards you as you are to them. And I mean, that's a bit embarrassing, but it can happen.
Does acting still make you happy? Like, I think when actors start out, it is a vocation. It's a thing they almost have to do. Yeah. They have to express it. But then as the years go by, does your relationship with it change?
Definitely. I think it's eased up a lot. But it's paradoxical because don't want to put myself in your class, but I started off being able to sort of imitate people, and that's when people say, oh, you should be an actor because you can do funny voices and stuff like that, and then you get to drama school and it becomes more about finding you, and you go, ooh, I don't know about that. And so I did a lot of work in the early years where I was sort of, as you say, expressing myself in the classical roles, because you can't hide in those classical roles. It's sort of, you're the engine and you've got to put it out it's got to come from inside you. Sort of in a way, I don't have a great desire to do that. Although I have a bit of and I'm having a great time playing lots of different characters now, sort of doing what I thought acting was when I was younger, sort of putting on different wigs and funny voices and that, who doesn't enjoy that?
So there's one. Here's an example of your range. You did one of my favourite plays. I didn't see your production of it. Let's be very clear from the outset, in case you say, "Oh, thank you very much."
Yeah.
I didn't see yours. Death of a Salesman.
Oh, yeah.
Anthony Sher. Now, those are two very different women. Right at the other end of the... people who don't know, Death of a Salesman, of course, Arthur Miller, it's a masterpiece.
One of the best plays ever.
It's a stunning piece.
I mean, funnily enough, what I had just come from was playing Henry IV. And I'd been in an all-female Shakespeare company, and I was butching up all over the place, and I was the King of England. And then I go straight from playing the King of England to Mrs. Doormat, which you could say.
Yeah, you could.
Linda Lohman is a doormat, but she isn't really. I mean, she's got real fibre, and but it was, to me, that was a wonderful contrast, putting on a pinny and going around the kitchen giving my boys a good meal and that and backing up this sad, hopeless husband and, seeing him through his worst sort of nervous breakdown.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
But she's such a wonderful character because she's not soppy in any way, but she's just loyal, and it just wouldn't occur to her not to back up her husband and be there for him.
Let's talk about theatre for a bit, because that's how it started for you. Am I right?
Yeah, but I wanted to be a movie star. I mean, my uncle was a movie star.
Yeah.
And I was 9 years old and went and saw him on the set.
And you knew that Christopher Lee was a big deal. You were aware that he was this big thing. Time-wise, he lived long enough to see your... Yeah, because he only went a few years ago, didn't he?
That's right.
He lived to a ripe old age.
He lived... actually, I rang him on his 93rd birthday.
Yes, that's right. He was very old, wasn't he?
And said happy birthday on his 93rd birthday. He said, I haven't had a job in 3 months.
Is that what he said? Is that what he said?
Yes.
Oh. So he encouraged you. At what age then would he have become aware that, my niece Harriet, she wants to do this?
I think my mother threw me at him when I was about 17 and threatening to be an actress, and I think she wanted him to put me off. I'm not sure, but or at least to sort of put me straight about the realities of the job. And I've just finished reading his autobiography. It's a bit late in the day. And it's fascinating because he had so many failures for so long, and he wasn't paid, and he was cheated, and he was, and of course I thought I was, it's all right for you, you're a film star, I'm struggling away in fringe theatre, but actually he'd done all that too. We never really talked about it, which is sad. But anyway, he gave me a long lecture about how difficult it was, and, but I carried on anyway. But so I thought, and when I went to drama school, I was always, yes, you're very subtle. You could be on television or film, but you'll never make it in the theatre because you've got such a lightweight voice.
Kidding.
You've got to learn to project.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So I suppose the devil in me said, I'll go into the theatre.
And you didn't get into drama school easily.
No.
When I read this about you, I thought, hey, we got something in common. Because I was also turned down by RADA and Central and AN Other.
I hope they're listening now.
But you were turned down how many times?
5 out of 5.
And you had the chance. You could have gone to Oxford.
Yeah. I know that's a bit... I never came out about that for years. I was so ashamed about it. I thought it was so... But if I put the context, it was my grandfather who wanted to... he thought I'd got a brain, and he thought of all the family... he was actually very pro-women education, and I found this out later.
Yeah.
Both his daughters went to, his eldest daughter went to Oxford in the 30s. Right. My aunt. Right. He was very in favour of women's education. He was some kind of president of the Women's Writers Association or something.
Wow.
None of which I knew because I only knew him as a scary old Victorian.
So you could have, and it was languages you would have done.
It was languages, yeah. And so my grandfather wanted me to go to Oxford or Cambridge, didn't mind, so long as it was one of them.
Yeah, not fussy.
So I thought I'd just got free from boarding school. I was at boarding school and I was longing to go out with boys and go to nightclubs and dress up and wear short skirts and lots of makeup. That's what my ambition was. And then go and be a famous actress. Okay, a little bit later. But I literally, before I left boarding school, in my last term, half term, my dad broke the news that my grandfather wanted me to sit the Oxbridge University exams. And then I remember getting this letter saying, we'd like to offer you a place. And I just rang up my father and said, I don't want to go.
Ooh.
And I remember where I was when I said it. And I
Where
remember
were you?
I was in a friend's kitchen.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, well, that's all right. Because
Really?
my dad was sort of, I think as the second son of this rather tyrannical father, sort of thought, well, okay, you do your own thing, girl.
Which languages do you speak?
French, Spanish, Italian, a bit of Russian.
No.
Not fluently, but I can make myself understood.
Oh, très bien. That's
Très
French,
bien.
okay?
That's French.
Because you got 4, you'd have to figure out which one it was, so I can help you there. That's French. Molto bene is Italian,
Doing well, isn't
okay?
he?
And Spanish. Yeah,
Muy bien.
muy bien, yeah.
And Russian,
No.
очень хорошо.
Oh, wow, that's impressive. So you'd say, right, I'm not going to Oxford.
I know.
And you apply for drama school, and then as you're getting turned down by these drama schools, your parents must be thinking, we're not sure Harriet's making the right decision.
That's where I want to rewind the tape and go, what conversations must they have had?
Yes, exactly. Now you see it. Now you think, well, what were they thinking?
Nice parents, just supportive of
encouraging
what I
you.
wanted to do. And I think partly, all sorts of things contribute, don't they? Partly, I think this aspect of they were the sort of rather disregarded member of their family.
Right, yeah, that's interesting.
And so they sort of thought, oh, go for the freedom of it. You'd go for what you want. Plus, my mother had seen me at school in plays, and she did say to me, I think you've got something, from very early on.
That makes a difference, then, if you can see a talent and you think... what about that thing, though, the talent versus tenacity? I would say tenacity is as, if not more, important than talent.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Totally, I agree with you. I mean, along the way, I meet so many people who were terribly good.
Yes.
And just said, I just wasn't prepared to go through the hoops and be treated like that. And, you've got to want something so badly to get over all the hurdles. And
when you were being rejected by these drama schools, I'm sure your frame of mind was, that's okay, next bit. You just keep going forward.
God knows, I mean...
You don't step back and see this person who's struggling.
No, I mean, what's extraordinary... I've got a little story to tell you which may or may not get in. But when I was working with Richard E.
Yes.
He said something about he'd been born in Swaziland or something.
Richard E. Grant.
Richard E. Grant. He was talking about being born in Swaziland or something, or growing up in Swaziland. And I said, I've been there. And he said, no, you haven't. Nobody has. Don't be silly. And I said, I have in 1969. And in 1969, I wrote a diary. I thought, I'm going to look at that diary and find out exactly where I was in Swaziland and come back and tell Richard. And I did. And I looked it up and I got so absorbed in my diary because it was the same year as I was being turned down all the time by these drama schools, right? Yeah. So I sort of went, oh, gosh, that's interesting. I was in love with him. And then I got to this one that said, it was my first audition at Central. And it said, blah, blah, blah. 4 names were called out afterwards. Mine wasn't among them. We all went home on the same tube, strap hanging and blah, blah. And then at the bottom, it said, but I know I'm going to get there in the end. I don't know where I get this from, but I know. Or words to that effect. Yeah. And it was in the same ink, in the same handwriting. I thought, I did not add this later. This was written on that night. And I have no recollection of having that kind of determination. I had it in no other area of my life. I was an absolute wimp, which was why I didn't get in, because I turned, so that's it.
Oh, you're just too nice. And
that's
too,
what I'm talking about, the gap between what's inside you and what you put out there. And that was and my whole life has been about closing that gap and saying, this confidence I have inside, I'm going to show you that I actually can do it. But the gap was too big at that point. I was, I put across this absolute sort of, I don't really know.
But it's funny, isn't it? Because you've played so many strong characters, so many strong women.
Yeah.
I mean, when you started out in the theatre and you look at your theatre credits, it's just all the classics.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom.
But I started off playing Ophelia and Nina and the sort of tragic,
but you're Lady,
people.
but you were also Lady Macbeth.
Lady Macbeth when I was about 45. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
So I grew up through.
Yeah.
I played the much more vulnerable people when I was younger, and it's sort of almost I grew up through
That's
the
a very
parts.
nice, natural,
a nice progression,
isn't it? Yeah.
Bitch.
To Caroline. So that's and the difference. I always like talking to actors about the different disciplines, film and or TV, because so much TV now is like a film.
Yeah.
When you're on Succession, it's no different to if you're making a movie.
Yeah.
Maybe the pace is different.
The pace is different, yes.
But in terms of the budgets, the scale, the scale of Succession is greater
absolutely
than a movie. The storytelling is huge.
Yes, the budgets. I mean, I'm involved now in this thing called Silo for Apple TV. And we watched the first 2 episodes on the big screen with an audience. And I promise you, it's like Alien or something. The sets are like Star Wars. They're just enormous, great,
You've done Star Wars as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
What did you do? Remind me what you did.
I had a 2-hander with Chewbacca. Now, I mean, how good is that? I counted. I played, when you can count the thing on your video player, 7 seconds I was on screen.
You're on for 7 seconds?
Yeah, but 7 seconds is actually enough to say, how are you? And, oh, how very nice to meet you. And it's been lovely.
And what does he say?
I didn't even know what I was auditioning for, like nobody does for that.
No, that's right, yeah.
I didn't know what I was auditioning for. Therefore, I completely forgot about it.
Yes.
And then this call came from my agent saying J.J. Abrams wants you to be in Star Wars, but he doesn't know what. So I thought,
find something for you.
And then about
lovely.
4 weeks later, I get, will you go for a costume fitting?
Huh?
So I go to Pinewood, and this knock on my door, and it says, do you want your sides? And sides are, your script. And I said, yeah, sure, that would be nice.
You've no idea what you're doing.
Nothing, no idea. And I got this 1 page, and I said, have you dropped some on the way? Why have you employed me to do? And do you know what my original script was?
No.
You are most welcome. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 words.
It's great, though. It's a lovely thing to have in alongside Lady Macbeth and Carol. I mean, it's
absolutely.
That's what I say about Purple Patches. Yeah. You must be smiling most days, surely.
Of course I am. I do wake up in the morning saying I'm a lucky person.
Because Silo.
Yes.
That's become a thing, right?
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Yeah. But Ted Lasso.
Yes.
So talk about being in zeitgeisty things.
Well, you don't know you are.
No, you don't know. I know, but here you are.
Yeah, but it's fabulous. And I think I do get bits of envy patch when I go in on a set of Ted Lasso and go, oh, can't I be in it some more?
Yeah.
Can't I have another day like this? Yeah. Because it's such fun and Jason's hilarious and, they just chuck a line at you, forget the script.
Is that a modern thing or have you often found yourself in situations where lines are being thrown in and...
Those are the only 2 times when it's really happened. But on Succession, they always have 1 for free. Yeah. So you can always improvise at least 1 scene. And it's not total improvisation, it's just loosening it up. And I like that because certainly, if it's Shakespeare or a classical thing, I'll stick to every line or Arthur Miller, the rhythm's built in, it's intentional and it cannot be bettered. But sometimes when it's a contemporary part that perhaps you've been chosen for because you're quite like that or because, because they think that person, then sometimes you eventually know your character better than the writer does. And you know your own rhythms or your own sense of comic
or what the
timing.
character has become because you've sort of infused so much of yourself into it.
Yes.
That it's gone in interesting directions. No, look, I could carry on for another hour.
But we haven't got that time.
But, I'm going for lunch with my son. You have things to do today.
I've got a sad thing to do, yes.
You've got a sad thing to do, yes. Harriet's going to a funeral, we should say. Otherwise, people will wonder.
Yeah, they'll wonder why I'm dressed in
What was the sad thing? Did you ever see Edna Everage on Parkinson with Judi Dench and Sharon Osbourne?
Yes,
and the 2 of them are wearing sleek black things. And Edna says, whose funeral are you going to? Brilliant. I've loved this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. I've loved it too.
And if only for the chance to say to you once again how I bow down before you specifically for Succession, but pretty much for everything.
Stop. Thank you very, very much.
Dame Harriet Walter.